to me, and this is my kind of subjective opinion, to me, people are ready to trade time for privacy,
Ye
right?
yeah,
I think so. What do you think about this?
I think so. I think you're right. I think to some extent that's true. But of course, there's a limit. I think you sort of run into limits on both sides of it. Does it save you enough time that it's worth it? If it doesn't, then maybe not. And then at the same time, exactly how much of your privacy are you giving up? So it's really interesting. I think I wrote about this in one of my books. I can't remember I think it was Humans 3.0, that uh, privacy is there's the expectations of privacy, I think, have changed over time as well. And one of the key points that I think I expanded on in the book was, there's this tendency among the older generation to think that the younger generation especially doesn't really value privacy, but that has in studies proven to not be true at all. The young people do actually have a high value of privacy. It's just that where they place that privacy is the interesting part. So it's not necessarily that there was a study done at I think it was the University of Ottawa, where they asked a
Mhm.
bunch of kids, they said, this was back in the days when Blackberries where everybody was using Blackberries, and they said, well, do you know that BlackBerry owns your messages basically, and they can, if they really wanted to, they could look into your messages. And the kids were basically saying, yeah, well, we don't really care. We're not really afraid of BlackBerry. We don't really think BlackBerry's out to get us or going to do anything harmful to us. Who knows? They could be wrong. But the
Mhm.
point they were making was we use BlackBerry Messenger because it's a texting option that is far more private to communicate with our friends as opposed to talking to them on the phone, which our parents will be listening in on, or they can hear us from the next room, and so on. So the point is that they wanted to keep their communications private from their parents, but they don't really care about the corporations that may be harvesting this data. So there is privacy. I think people still have privacy expectations. It's just that where it's who is seeing that information is the important part. So anyways, it's a very long again, another long answer to your question, but I think people still do value privacy, and I think there is a limit to which they're willing to give it up to Google or Amazon or whoever. And it's just a case of how far do those companies go, or what limits do they push, and have they reached them yet? I don't think they have, at least not as
Yeah.
far as Google and Amazon are concerned.
Do you think, in general, and kind of in a socio-cultural sense, as a society, the fact that there is a good likelihood that somebody is watching, somebody is listening, we have the potential to become better in terms of, just our humane kind of characteristics and just become better people, not in kind of Orwellian sense, but more just in the sense of being more accountable to
Hmm.
ourselves and the world and be more aware of our actions.
Yeah, there's I think there's a full chapter on that in Humans 3.0 about this panopticon. The panopticon is this old concept of kind of the all-seeing eye that sees everything. And it was really an architectural term where it was used in building design, particularly in prisons, where you would have like a central guard tower, and then you have all the cells basically open facing this guard tower so that whoever's in the guard tower could see into all of the cells and see what was going on.
Mhm.
That's the panopticon concept. The practical sense or application of this in the real world is that, like you said, everybody's being watched, everybody's being surveilled. So the effect of that generally, and a lot of studies that have been done in these kind of surveillance situations, especially in the UK where you've got a lot of cameras on street corners and so on, is that it tends to make people more conservative. So there's a plus and a minus to that. It makes them more conservative and less likely to engage in bad activities, crime or terrorism, or even just things like antisocial behavior in public. People don't behave that way, or are less likely to behave that way when they know they're being watched. That's been scientifically proven many times. The downside to that is, again, it tends to make people more conservative. They're not liberal liberal activity or liberal opinions are not going to be as expressed as readily. And when I say liberal, we're not talking necessarily politically. We're talking socially. So, for example, in a very conservative society, or one that's being watched where everybody's being watched very closely, people who have radical opinions are less likely to voice them. Or, if they engage in radical activity that's not necessarily criminal, or it could be criminal, even, something like sexuality, for example, that's far more likely to be repressed and not voiced as loudly as you might when in a place where you're not being watched quite so closely.